Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Erin Polnazik Boyd. I'm an English advisor. I'm an undergraduate advisor in the English department. It's lovely to have you come join us today. We're going to spend a little bit of time just welcoming everybody. Cameras on or off as you feel comfortable. With me today, I have somebody from the University Health Services. Kimberly is going to be sharing some great information, resources, and tips with you all. Questions are welcome and encouraged. So at any point, if you have a question, go ahead, raise your hand, unmute, share, or in the chat, whatever feels comfortable for you today. And I think from there, I'll turn it over to Kimberly.
Hey, that sounds good. I have a PowerPoint prepared. So let me just set things up on my screen and then I think I can share the screen. Sometimes I feel a little bit like a dinosaur when I struggle with the technology. So I am going to share my screen. And let's see. Are you seeing a PowerPoint?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Well, now I can begin. And I'm also adjusting, where I see my little Brady Bunch screen so I can see you and toggle between looking at you and looking at the screen. So thank you so much for making time. Those of you who are here. I know we have it looks like maybe a pretty small group. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, so totally okay to decline. But since there might only be like 4 to 6 of us, would it be useful to say hello and say your name, or does that feel like it's harder to participate in that way? You just kind of want to be chill and take things in. If you would like to say hello, you can turn your camera on. And if you do not want to, that's completely welcome. Thanks for being here. However, it feels right to be here. Oh, hi. Thanks, Kathy. Okay, so thanks for making time for today. The topic for today is tips on navigating end of semester stress, which Erin and I were chatting. This is so timely because, well, not only because the end of fall semester, I think, is always stressful, but also because the world is so stressful. And I don't know about all of you, but I'm seeing constantly in my own life, in the lives of students, and in the news, all of this evidence of how we're all being asked to move through life right now in a way that is challenging to our sense of well-being and our mental health. So my plan for today is to try and go pretty broad and name sort of a wide variety of stressors that I think are pretty typical in normal times for college students at the end of a semester, and then also acknowledge some larger global and national and community stressors, and share resources and tips that some might resonate with you and some might not, and that's perfectly fine and normal. And so just want to invite you to take in what feels right and leave behind, don't take in what doesn't feel right. And if at any point, because I am going fairly broad, if at any point someone feels inclined to say, hey, can we pause here a moment? I have a question, or this doesn't really resonate with me, or can we just spend some more time here? Can you say more? I do welcome interruptions throughout. You're welcome to put those into the chat, or to just turn on your camera and speak up, or to raise your hand, whatever feels most useful to you. And if it feels best to just kind of chill and take things in, that's totally welcome as well. So thanks for being here exactly as you are. Okay. So my name is Kimberly Lux. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am a mental health provider or psychotherapist at University Health Services. And specifically, I work in our survivor services department. So I specialize in serving folks who have experienced trauma, either on campus, off campus, or even before they came to UW. So again, this is our agenda. So kind of broad. I want to start. I often wait until the end to share UHS services and typically run out of time. So I just wanted to front load. So at least you have that in your back pocket. And I can also, if it works, I can share this PowerPoint with Erin so that she can share it with anyone who might be interested. And so you can have these resources at your fingertips as well. So we'll go over UHS services, what services and resources are available on campus. Then we'll chat about some common stressors, how stress might show up for us, and how we feel and how we think in our social relationships, and even in our bodies. And then we'll take some time to talk about what we can do to manage that stress, both from sort of a personal perspective and then maybe in a more collective sort of perspective. Okay, so these are the services available for free for students who pay the student health fee. So these are available for free. I don't know the specifics. If for some reason you've opted out of the student health fee, that doesn't mean that it's too late to take advantage of these services. I think that there is still a way. So I think when people think of MHS, they probably think about our individual counseling. Maybe they think about group counseling and maybe think about like our psychiatry services. So we have those. We also do have couples counseling. Only one member of the couple needs to be a student. And then from there, we have a variety of other maybe less traditional services that some students might also find useful. So we do these sort of one-off single sessions that folks could sign up for. We have these Let's Talk sessions, which in the before times and before COVID used to be that we would set mental health services folks up in the Red Gym and people could show up and just chat one-on-one, sometimes in a smaller group, sometimes while doing like cute arts and crafts. And just kind of get support and talk about whatever is on your mind without sort of the commitment of a long-term therapeutic relationship. And so that service is still available. All of our services are available through telehealth right now. So if you're interested in Let's Talk, you would just go into our website and you could sign up as late as, I think it's midnight the night before. So that's our sort of modified drop-in space. And then we offer a variety of workshops, some kind of focused on like studying and academics, and others that are broader and cover topics that are broader within mental health. And you can find those on our website, and those are free to sign up for. And then if sometimes folks are interested in connecting with the community for mental health services instead of UHS, and we can help navigate that process through our care managers. And that service is even available to you after you graduate. So keep us in mind for any kind of mental health resource. If you're not sure where to start, we can be available. And then I mentioned that I work in survivor services. So we primarily do serve survivors of intimate partner violence, and sexual harassment. But we also serve folks who identify as having experienced any form of interpersonal trauma in their life. So you can reach out to us through the main line, option 3. You can also, we don't just have counseling services within survivor services, we have advocates. And so that's less about mental health support and more about navigating logistics of academic accommodations or reporting options, accessing medical support, things like that. And so if you know anyone who could benefit from that, we also do serve loved ones of survivors, friends of survivors who are like, I don't know how to support this person, or I'm being affected by this. So people can call our main line, option 3, they can email us, or to meet with an advocate, you can even self-book yourself through our website. So those resources are here, and I'll make sure Erin gets them as well. And then outside of mental health services, in UHS, there's a variety of wellness supports. So you can meet one-on-one with somebody to talk about stress management in general, to talk about sleep management, pain management, nutrition counseling. We have yoga classes. There's online mental health modules. If you just kind of want like some some different tips, sort of some self-help opportunities. Silver Cloud is a specialized service where you enter information for yourself, and they kind of set up an online mental health support module for you. Amazing mindfulness workshops that are run by like amazing mental health providers. And some of those you sign up to go. It is a longer term workshop to learn about mindfulness training. There's also just like drop-in meditation spaces if you want to meditate in community. So really a variety of supports. I can really hardly name them all. So check out the UHS website if any of these appeal to you. Recwell also offers massages. Those do have a fee, but they're probably cheaper than the community. So get a massage, check it out. To access our services, so for individual therapy or group therapy or psychiatry services, the entry point is what's called an access appointment, and you can web book that yourself through the website. That can all be hard to remember. So when in doubt, just give us a call. And then for some of these other services that I've named outside of general counseling, they have sort of a different entry point for each service. So check out the website if you have questions about that. And we always, in most of our presentations from MHS, we like to invite folks, go ahead and put our 24/7 crisis line in your phone. That's something you can do today to sort of have immediate 24/7 access to support. Maybe you don't anticipate that you will need it, but maybe at some point, someone that you come into contact with will really benefit from you having that number at your fingertips. So just remember that help is always available. There's no wrong reason to call the crisis line. We're here 24/7. All right, before I shift, I just want to check in, take a pause to see if anyone does have any questions about our services or accessing our services. Okay, I'll trust that if anything comes in through the chat, Erin will interrupt us and we can look at things together. So I do want to invite folks, if you would feel comfortable sharing the chat, totally okay if you don't. What is causing you stress right now? You don't have to give any personal information. You can just give like bird's eye, like school or family. Or if you don't want to share personal disclosure, if you just kind of think about like, what's the vibe generally on campus or in your department? Is there anything that folks want to share? I took a guess based on my experience with students and my own experiences in the world. Yeah, I see Erin naming finals, end of semester, wrap up. Absolutely. TTC, is that the title? Yes, totally. New information about salary structure and title. That's stressful. Yeah, next up, uncertainties. I mean, there's so many things I feel like, is that relevant to this time of life in particular, being a student or a professional in transition? Are we talking about what's going to happen with COVID? I mean, there's so many next up uncertainties. I don't know if thinking of all the ones. Okay, great. Thank you all so much for participating in that. So, okay, here we go. So here are some of the things that I think of with sort of the end of semester finals and wrap up. There's a lot of demands. A lot of people are feeling overworked and overwhelmed, unsure which demands to prioritize, how to get things done. I think a lot of times college students put a lot of pressure on themselves to get amazing grades every single time. Or even just to pass, right? Sometimes things are really challenging and it feels really scary and people find themselves struggling. or comparing themselves and feeling bad about themselves, and a lot of times imagining how everyone else seems to be moving through the world with so much more ease. Maybe financial stressors, adjusting to increased or decreased flexibility in our schedule. I don't know who all might be tuning in, but just thinking about adjusting to the college experience in general. Sometimes people find that they have a lot more flexibility in their schedule than they've ever had before compared to high school, and that can be very stressful. Sometimes people find that they have decreased flexibility in their schedule, maybe because they have to work to put themselves through college. And then just again with the pandemic and shifts in, are we doing remote learning or are we doing in-person learning? That's been a hard shift for people, I think, in both directions, adjusting to not connecting in person with people, or just not having the flexibility of being able to work from home and having to be in person. And I did notice, worried about failing class this semester. And that is a common stressor. And that can impact our mental health. And I'm sure Erin has resources about like Dean of Students or different academic supports. So if there are specific questions about specific supports or resources, just let us know. Yeah, and being in person is also stressful, totally. Totally. For a variety of reasons. Some people found relief from like not being in person because of like social anxiety or just time management, having more flexibility at home, let alone COVID. And are we masked? Are we not masked? Are we vaccinated? And all of these, we all respond to that risk differently, and it is stressful. And then social pressures and expectations is something like I hear about a lot. How do I juggle my relationships with my academic demands, people not feeling as connected as they want to feel, and then feeling like maybe that means that there's something wrong with them. And then a lot of pressure on oneself, and a lot of inner critics, I think, get activated when we are stressed. And here we go, okay. And then I don't know if you can see this little illustration. This comes from a cool website called Trauma Stewardship. There's a lot of self-care strategies there, but just kind of naming these different layers of things that might be impacting us on a very interpersonal level, like managing our classes and our jobs, our families and our caretaking responsibilities. And then also, when navigating a pandemic and systematic oppression and structural supremacy and the climate crisis and democracy is in peril in my life in general, there's just layers and layers of real harm that's occurring. And depending on your identity and your community, you might feel differentially impacted by these pieces. But for all of us, it's the water that we're swimming in, it's the air that we breathe, and we're impacted by it. And I do want to name that some people come to campus and feel othered or marginalized in class spaces or campus spaces. And this is very real harm and a very real stressor, and it can be extremely isolating. And of course, this is all happening at a time when we're getting ready for a winter break and the holiday season. And for some people, this is relieving and a light at the end of the tunnel. And for other people, this is one more layer of stress or grief or loss or loneliness that can be hard to navigate. And then we've we've talked a little bit about COVID-19, but this is a really big stressor as well. And to give you a sense of how this is impacting folks, the CDC has been surveying more than 5,000 folks, which is a pretty robust number of respondents. So this is pretty reliable. And they they had a group that they were able to survey prior to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that they've been tracking and following up with. So prior to the onset of COVID-19, among those respondents, 8% endorsed that they cope with anxiety, 7% endorsed that they cope with depression. And after the onset of COVID-19, those numbers almost tripled, quadrupled. So really up to a quarter of folks are a really significant number dealing with anxiety, dealing with depression, and a pretty significant either initiation or increase in substance use during that time. And so this was a survey of adults. And I don't know if anyone saw in the news, but this week, the Surgeon General just issued a public health crisis for young people in particular, and young people in particular's struggles with mental health. So, and young people would include children, adolescents, and young adults. So this is very real. And I think that this is something that you don't necessarily need me to tell you is here, but I think it's important to name it and reflect that back. And so when we have stress in our lives, it's of course, it's going to impact our performance. It's going to impact how we show up in different spheres of our life, including academics. And I think I noticed that when I'm working with folks, there's a lot of awareness of it, but it's like, so what? There's nothing I can do about it. I still have to perform. I still have to get this done. And so it seems like the only option is to really push through. And I'm not denying that that is in fact the case, but I do want to talk about how stress impacts our ability to push through. And so we have this stress performance curve that illustrates how some stress is actually useful for performance and how we show up and get things done. A little bit of stress can help us to be activated, can help us to be alert, focused, motivated to show up and do what we need to do. But there's a point where that stress becomes problematic, and too much stress as you move along that x-axis actually really impacts our performance and lowers our ability to show up. Because if we're super activated, if we're super anxious, that's really hard for us to concentrate. Sometimes we become so stressed that we actually shut down and are maybe numb or checked out and find a hard time finding any motivation. And this is very real. And so as much as we might like to push through when we're in the red zone, neurobiology, neuroscience actually tells us that that's not possible, because when we're operating from our survival brain and our stress response brain, our brainstem is activated. And in order to help support us in, this is like evolutionary and running for our life or responding to threat, our brainstem gets activated and our brains are really efficient. So it shuts down our prefrontal cortex, which is where what we need when we're problem solving and using like discipline and impulse control and those kinds of things. So if you can notice that you're in the red zone, what can help you shift back to that optimal performance is doing something to regulate yourself, which is like, I guess, another more wonky way of saying like self-care. And there's a variety of what can be helpful with self-care. Sometimes, taking a break and getting a cup of tea is helpful, and sometimes that nowhere near cuts it. So we'll try to talk about those different layers as well. Any questions or comments at this point?
I love this curve, Kimberly. I think this is just really resonating with some conversations I had this week where students, exactly 100% what you said, feel like if I just push through, but noticing from the perspective that I'm sitting in, that I think we're past the ability to push through, that it does need to be, we need to address this immediate thing happening before we can then make progress forward. So I think that resonates. Maybe others feel that same way.
Yeah. And hard too, because we don't have, and we'll talk about this. I'd like to talk about this when we talk about self-care, but we don't have control over the whole picture, right? There are things we can do, hopefully, to calm ourselves or take care of ourselves, but we don't have control of when there's a deadline or what it takes to get that credit. So I don't want to minimize that either. So recognizing stress, recognizing when you're in the red zone, maybe that seems pretty intuitive. I know when I'm stressed out, but it can be different and layered for different folks. So I'm going to keep chatting, but if you want to just add to the chat how stress might show up for you or how you know it shows up for others, that could be useful for us to discuss or just for others to see and feel validated in. Yeah, so we can think about our emotional response as a start, right? Maybe we feel anxious, maybe we feel irritable, maybe we feel sad, maybe we have up and downs, mood swings, we find ourselves crying, we're worrying a lot. We might notice it in our emotions. We might also notice in maybe how we're showing up in our relationships. Maybe we're withdrawing. Maybe we feel not good about ourselves, and so we're isolating. Maybe we feel lonely. We're not reaching out for support. We're not responding to others the way we usually do. And then that can have a cyclical impact too on how okay we feel if we're not getting supports that nourish us. And then also this can impact our thinking. When I am stressed, I lose my phone, my keys, and my wallet 4 times a day. And then that slows me down and gets in my way as well. Inability to concentrate or low productivity. I don't think I'm the only one who occasionally sits down to get things done. And lo and behold, I just cannot stop looking at my phone, no matter how urgent something feels. And I am just not producing or productive. And maybe we just feel generally negative, have sort of a negative view of everything around us, or feel confused, foggy. And then the physical response, I think, is really important. And I saw in the chat about sleep. Maybe we're having struggles with falling asleep, staying asleep. Maybe we're having struggles where we're sleeping too much or more than we really want to be. Maybe having headaches or aches and pains, fatigue in our body. And some of us might be really in tune with our bodies and able to use our body as a resource of, oh, my body's letting me know that I'm overwhelmed and I need to do something different. I think a lot of us, though, in our culture are actually trained to just be in our head as often as possible and to not pay any attention to these cues. And so I think it's useful to know that emotions all begin with a somatic experience. They all begin with something in our body, and it's different for everyone. So we might not all be aware of that. That was like really new information for me and something that I'm still working with, getting more attuned to my body. So think of your body as a little bit of a barometer and see if you can tend to that a little bit. All right. Okay, so again, curious about some ways that you cope with stress, and maybe that's part of why you're here, because you're looking for more ways. But just want to invite folks to think about how you already cope with stress, whether you think it's really healthy and perfect and works, or whether it's something you know that you reach for and maybe it's relieving momentarily, but in the long term, not so helpful. Just want to welcome folks to share some of that. If you think of any, as we move forward, drop them in the chat. And just, I think this is a useful thing to reflect on. Oh, someone has their hand raised.
Yeah, so I just, I didn't want to write all this, which is my
Perfect, thank you.
Sure. Well, basically, when I think of myself, and I know a lot of my students are very similar, one of the ways that I cope with my stress is to, a rigorous physical activity, go out and run for a few miles, that kind of thing. But this time of year, we just don't have the time, right? So, and by the time you do get home from whatever, whether it be work or a full day of studying or working on papers and whatever, you're exhausted and you just kind of really want to go to bed or just sort of sit and have dinner and whatever, you know? So I'm just wondering what I guess I want to hear other people's ways of coping, because sometimes your best way of coping, you just can't do it, right? So I guess I want to know what might be some other outlets that are useful for others or that you've heard other people using, just so that maybe we can kind of think of that next time or right now when we're all really stressed.
Yeah, that's really speaking some important truth, is that we might have things that work for us and then they stop working for us, or they're not available to us because we have so much on our plate. We just don't have time to go for that run, or because it's dark at 4:15 or it's freezing cold, or whatever it might be, or we're just so exhausted and overwhelmed. And I see some more in the chat, listening to music, running, meditation. And so for this conversation, there are things like strategies, right, that might appeal to you, and we can remind you of those or offer new ones. And there might be also maybe different ways of sort of being with yourself and being with your emotional reactions, and where you can sort of take like small bites of self-care, even in internal ways, even if you don't have the energy or the time to go for that like long run that you'd like to. So please, yes, that's a good reminder too, Kathy, that we can like support one another by sharing, well, this is something that works for me, and that's going to be really beneficial to someone else. So please don't hesitate to share. And when we do talk about self-care, I just want to acknowledge that I think it seems to me like more and more, I don't know if it's this generation or if it's universal, just kind of this time in the world where it seems like there is more attention and discussion about self-care. And I think that's great. And this also sometimes can be a little bit problematic if it's sort of like, well, you know, we gave you the self-care tips, so if you're stressed out, like that's on you. Maybe you need to run or exercise or eat better. And it doesn't take into account some of the systemic things that get in the way, or it just becomes one more thing on the to-do list that really is kind of unmanageable. So wanting to broaden and think about self-care in ways that are beyond just like specific strategies, while also knowing that those specific strategies can be really helpful. And thinking about how do we care for one another, and how do we maybe shift the idea of self-care from a exclusively like individualistic place, this is my responsibility, and how do we think about relying on community and creating community as well. So these are just some personal self-care ideas that are shorter and more accessible, that might be helpful to you. And again, if this doesn't resonate, then it doesn't resonate, and that's okay. But just taking a beat to name your emotions without judging them, or even without trying to change them or fix them. So often we go into that problem-solving mode that we are actually working so hard so much of the time to really avoid having a real emotional experience. We're like right on the edge. We feel like we're right on the edge of a meltdown. And I was at a training recently where the folks shared that if we allow ourselves to fully feel an emotion without trying to change it or judge it or avoid it or push it away, it will be painful. There will be a peak in that emotion. And what they said is that it will last for about 3 minutes. So I don't know if that resonates with you. I haven't looked at the research on that or clocked that within myself, but I think the general point is that a lot of our suffering is in working so hard to avoid really allowing that to be here. And so just something to consider. Mindfulness, meditation, we might think of meditation as something that we do for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes every day. But we can take mindfulness bites. We can take a moment to push our feet into the ground or take a breath or, reach for an essential oil or a favorite lotion and just like apply it mindfully and take in the smell. And that 1 minute can really regulate our nervous system. One of my favorite trauma researchers, Bruce Perry, talks about rhythm as being one of the most regulating things that we can do, especially rhythm with another person. So that might mean, think about rhythm. That could be like dancing, having your own private dance party, but it's literally could be like throwing a ball against the wall for 90 seconds or a minute, or throwing, rolled up pair of socks back and forth with your roommate. If you can move and take like a 90-second walk around wherever you live, outside or inside. If you can't do that, you can, this might sound silly, but like you can try to like a brisk march for 90 seconds and then a couple of deep breaths. And this is like neurobiology, how to regulate your system when you're feeling activated. So something to try and consider. And I think we hear a lot about exercise as self-care, and that does really work for people. Exercise is also really like loaded in these like value-ridden ways, and that might be stirring any kind of movement that feels good, that's not about losing weight or being fit or looking a particular way. Any movement that feels good to you, I think is maybe a better way to think about personal self-care. And then there's just a lot of research, and maybe this feels intuitive, that when you can be more in connection with things that are connected to your personal truth, your values, whether that's spirituality, gratitude, service, hope, things that you find meaning in. Maybe it's literature for you folks, but just connecting with something that feels valuable to you and connects you with a sense of something bigger. Making time for intentional ways of doing that, connecting with community, and then allowing yourself to have boundaries. Asking for extensions on papers or asking for adaptations or being allowed to say no to friends or family. And boundary setting isn't easy. I think they're sort of like, great, we'll just say no to that if you don't want to do it or if it's stressing you out. And that's much easier said than done. So also like be gentle with yourself and forgive yourself if you struggle with boundary setting, and give yourself permission to try again. And practice self-compassion. Self-compassion might sound like a pretty intuitive concept. Let's see, I have a video, but I need to cut and paste the link. It's just a 3-minute video. So if you don't mind bearing with me as I navigate my screen, I'm going to stop screen sharing briefly just because I don't know what's behind all my windows while I get this set up. And so while I'm setting up this brief video on self-compassion, just wonder if that has sparked any questions or thoughts, likes or dislikes.
I like the 90-second throw a ball at the wall. I think I'm gonna, utilize that a few times. It's simple, it's short, but I think it is. It's a good kind of reprieve to the side. So I like that.
Yeah. Surprisingly regulating. Cool. Okay. All right. So I think I've got this loaded here. So I'll go ahead and share my screen again. So this is a researcher named Kristen Neff. You might have heard of her. She's gotten a little bit of like pop culture attention. She's written some books and done some research on self-compassion. And this is her describing what she actually means by that. And I think it's great personally. I don't know though. Let me know if I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if you can hear it when I share a screen. So we'll try it. And
I think it's usually easier for people to
can hear
understand
it.
self-compassion.
Maybe if you could turn it up, or I'll turn it up, but yeah.
Have compassion for others, which is more familiar. So let's say you've got a good friend who you're very close to, and she tells you something that's gone wrong in her life, or maybe she's made some big mistake, blown her down a work assignment. So if you have compassion for your friend, the first thing is you're tuned into her suffering. I mean, maybe your friend doesn't even say she's upset, but you just notice the way she looks, and you say, "Oh, what's wrong? Tell me about it." So you've got to notice that she's suffering first, and then in response to that suffering, you have to be kind, caring, supportive, try to comfort your friend, soothe her, let her know that it's okay, let her know that you still care. And then finally, it's important to remember that suffering is part of the human experience. You might say to your friend, "Oh, it's only human, it happens to all of us. It's an experience that we all share," so your friend doesn't feel isolated in her suffering. So compassion really involves three basic components: noticing suffering, being kind and caring in response to that suffering, remembering that imperfection is part of the human experience, something we all share.
Is this the same for self-compassion?
Exactly the same. So with self-compassion, the most important step actually is to notice your own suffering. And a lot of people say, "Well, isn't that blindingly obvious?" But in fact, it's not. Especially when your suffering comes from your own self-judgment, self-criticism. Some of our worst pain is when we look in the mirror and we notice you gained 10 pounds. Well, that is a real moment of suffering that's worthy and deserving of a compassionate, caring, comforting response. But most of us don't do that. We just keep on beating ourselves up. Or let's say something happens like your child gets sick. Most of us go straight into problem solving mode. What do I have to do? Who do I have to call? And you forget to say, "Wow, this is really difficult. This is really stressful. I need some soothing and comforting." Most people forget that they need to give that to themselves. So again, with self-compassion, it's noticing that you're suffering. It's being kind in the face of that suffering, saying, "Oh, this is really hard. Poor thing, this is stressful, this is difficult," or "It's really hard to feel inadequate or ashamed about something." Just being really open-hearted toward yourself. And then finally, it's so important remembering that suffering and imperfection is part of the shared human experience. I mean, where's that contract you signed before you came into this world saying you would be perfect and life would be perfect? And yet most of us, when something goes wrong, either in ourselves and our lives, we say, "Hey, this isn't supposed to be happening." But in fact, it is supposed to be happening. It's part of the experience. It's okay. So self-compassion involves remembering when things go wrong, when you make mistakes, that you need to be kind and caring and supportive towards yourself. And the great thing about self-compassion is that you're always there. You're there 24/7 to give you help when you need it most.
okay, I'm gonna toggle back here. Any reactions to that or questions about it? Okay, I think her stuff is just great, and she's got a cool website, so check it out if you like it. And if that's not really for you, that's totally okay too. All right, here we go. Okay, so if that touchy-feely stuff is less helpful for you, here's something a little bit more concrete. Just going back to that end of semester kind of overwhelm of like, I have so many things to do. How do I think about just like prioritizing tasks? There just literally is too much. And there's this thing called the Eisenhower matrix, which gives you like a formula. So if you can divide your tasks into 4 categories, from important and urgent to important but not urgent, third, urgent but not important, and fourth, neither important nor urgent. So the Eisenhower matrix would suggest that once you've done that, then then the numbers indicate the order that you should proceed. I think number one is pretty clear, the most important and most urgent things you could do first. But I thought that 2 and 3 was kind of helpful. I think sometimes we the thing that feels urgent, we prioritize first, but maybe it's less important to us. And if we think about things like self-care, like maybe we know that like when we spend time with certain people, you know, we're happier, we're more connected, or when we're exercising or when we're meditating or whatever it is for us, that actually is really important to us, even though it maybe doesn't feel as urgent as getting those discussion questions posted or something like that. So the things that are important to you but not urgent, the Eisenhower matrix would suggest that you schedule that and you prioritize that and you make sure that that's a priority in your life. And I've seen people talk about this matrix in 2 different ways. First, just like I said, where this is sort of the order of tasks. You do 1, you do 2, you do 3, and then you do 4. And I've also seen people talk about it where you do 1 and you do 2. And number 3 are things that you try to delegate or set boundaries around. And number 4 are things that you don't do at all. So I think, you know, you can consider that and see what's realistic for you and the demands on you. And just some food for thought in terms of thinking about how to prioritize the things that are overwhelming you. And then just some reminders to not forget to attend to basic needs, things like exercise and sleep and nutrition. These are things that are so hard to do that I don't think any of us do perfectly. But just a permission to prioritize them, not more pressure to be perfect at all these things. And to prioritize hobbies and fun. You know, play is really a critically important part of our mental health, and it can so easily just be pushed to the side. And then I also like the sandwich method for when you have to do tasks that you don't really want to do. You can do that small self-care behavior like putting on your favorite music or making that perfect cup of tea, and then you can work, and then you can relax into a larger self-care behavior, like, you know, whatever it is, going on a hike or binging your favorite show. And I know we're a little on time, so I'm going to go through this section fairly quickly because I want to talk about like reaching out and supporting other folks in your life. But I've talked a little bit about like regulating our nervous system. And so sometimes I think that lens is helpful, that we all have a nervous system and it is wired to be constantly evaluating our environment and assessing for threat and stress, even if it's not, you know, the classic sort of bear in the woods kind of threat that we talk about a lot in our field when we're talking about their nervous system. But failing a class or having an imminent deadline, our nervous system responds to that as a true threat to our existence. And so if we want to think about how we can tend to our nervous system to bring some soothing, that can be helpful. And you might think about what is in your control. We can't control all the stress that we take in, but sometimes I get very stressed out looking at my phone, looking at my email. And so maybe that shouldn't be, if that stresses me out, maybe that shouldn't be the very first thing I do in the morning as I'm turning off my alarm clock. If there are people that activate you and turn your nervous system into like threat response mode, maybe you can purposely schedule time away from those people, the things that are in your control, to not forget about that. And then to not brush off when you do take in something stressful, to find a way to be with it or reflect on it in some kind of way. And again, these are all sort of nervous system focused ways of soothing yourself. A grounding strategy is any way of tuning into the present moment, usually through senses, taking stock of what you can see, what you can hear, what you can feel, what you can taste, what you can smell in the present moment. So that's something I would encourage you to do. Okay, so thinking about how we want to create a culture of care for one another. I didn't mean to go ahead. I would like, you don't have to put this in the chat if that doesn't feel good. If it does feel good, go ahead and do that or raise your hand. But I just want to invite you to take a moment to think about what would be helpful. Is there a way that another person could lend you support? It's sometimes hard when we're in the thick of things to think about that. And so if nothing is really coming and you've got a break later and there's less stress, reflect on this question. What makes things easier for you? And how are you available to support others? How might that feel good to you? And then try to talk about this with people in your life. I know that for myself, I am so much happier if I can do hard work alongside someone else. That eases my nervous system. For other people, right? It's helpful to have access to alone time. I also know that I need a lot of time for myself, but when I'm working or doing something stressful, it's relieving for me to have somebody next to me. So thinking about like communicating that and how you set that up. And then, asking for help doesn't mean that your support person is going to have a solution, but sometimes being witnessed eases so much. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Sometimes don't be afraid to ask for something concrete. Ask for help from a professor, ask for help from your advisor. If you feel really stuck and you feel that there's no way out, check in with somebody else. And that's, I think, hard to do, but part of being a part of a big system, you're a student. You're not expected to have all of the answers, right? There are support systems in place that are here designed to support you and help you navigate things that might seem impossible. And I just like this idea of encouraging everyone to remember to be as inclusive as you can. I think, being social is hard. And of course, I'm not saying that if being social doesn't feel good to you, that you should push against that, listen to yourself. But sometimes it feels a little scary to be the one to initiate connection or send that invitation. And it can just mean the world to another person, even if they're not free. So just thinking about that, just finding little ways of extending a sense of care and belonging to others. And then just wanted to say, because we are talking about mental health and a range of ways that stress can show up, what if there is someone in your life that you're concerned about? How can you maybe nudge them toward giving that some significant attention? So these are just some tips that we like to share, thinking about honoring that person's privacy and confidentiality. So if you do want to address it with them, doing so in private. And rather than making a judgments or assumptions, if you can just kind of be specific about your own observations. We talk about using I statements a lot, right? Like, I noticed that, you haven't been in class lately, or I noticed that you haven't been showing up to, our house dinners or whatever it is. And I just want to check in and see if anything's wrong. And so you can just name what you're seeing and show care and concern without saying like, something judgmental or saying like, I think you're depressed or anxious, or like naming some diagnosis for another person. And then if they do start to share, again, you don't have to solve it or know what to do, but you can be a listening ear and literally repeating back to someone what you're hearing can be really, really helpful. And so some common don'ts, don't minimize it. Don't say, oh, try not to worry about this, or that doesn't sound so bad. We don't ever know how someone else feels, even though we're really trying to. So just kind of watch out for those pitfalls. Open-ended questions. When did this start is better than a closed-ended question. It'll just create more space for discussion. And again, try not to lead. Try not to lead and say, something like, you're not like super depressed, are you? Was the example. Don't put words in their mouth about their experience. And then if you're ever unsure, you can absolutely call us to consult. So folks, of course, everybody on campus gets to decide if they want some kind of services. So it's up to them to make that appointment. But if you're really worried about somebody and you're not sure what to do, you can always call us to consult, and we can support you in either figuring out what your options are or helping you kind of monitor and tend to your own boundaries or activation around it. So don't hesitate to call us. And if you do kind of want to nudge somebody toward counseling or mental health services, just normalizing help seeking, offering to make that call together. And just, use their language. Again, we don't have to label anything, but stress, I think pretty much a lot of people, everyone relates to stress. We all have stress. So these are just some thoughts about if you think that that's useful for somebody, just how to create like a little bit more permission and safety in considering seeking that out. And so our key takeaways from today, just a real invitation to notice how you're doing in a holistic way. A lot of times we just notice that we're really stressed or that we notice the problem. And so trying to tune in with what's going on with you, with your emotions, with your thinking, with your social relationships, with what's going on with you physically. Notice when you're in that red zone, and then see, okay, what options are available to me to engage in self-care and self-compassion. And remind yourself that it's okay to not be perfect. And a big key takeaway is to reach out as needed. Reach out to us at UHS, reach out to one another. Here's a national crisis text line as well. If you don't like picking up the phone, the text line is cool. You just chat. And then I just included some other resources that you'll have when I give this to Erin if you want to look up more resources. And just invite you, I think we're right here at the end. If you do, just invite you to think if you have this, there's a takeaway that something, maybe one thing that you want to bring into your life from this talk that was helpful, or thinking about whether I named it today or not, what's one way that you can care for yourself or someone else today or this week. And that's what I have.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kimberly. This has really been helpful. Some great tips, resources, suggestions. I'll pause just a couple minutes in case there's follow-up questions, feedback, thoughts that folks want to share by raising hand, putting in the chat. But I hope I'm echoing for everyone today that we're so grateful for your time and your willingness to bring this to the center at such an important time.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for sharing the time with me. Yeah, thanks for that. And I can also let me know if this doesn't work for you, but I can hang on to the Zoom for another 5 minutes if anyone wants to linger or connect. I could do that for 5 to 10 minutes if that was
Super kind of you. Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, thanks everyone for joining. We'll send out the slides and a recording of the session for those in attendance in case you want to deep dive into any of those. And then it'll also have that contact information for UHS as well.